When the Mahdi's time came, he really lived a very religious life since childhood. And when Mahdism has befallen upon him, he started preaching. He preached essentially the renaissance of Islam, the coming back of Islam to what we know in Muslim theology as the book and the Sunnah, Al-Kitab was Sunnah. That is coming back to the original sources of Islam. That sources is the Quran and the sayings of the practices of the Prophet Muhammad. As such, this preaching made a great effect on the Sudanese, and they all supported him and believed that he was the true successor of the Prophet Muhammad. The revolution originally intended to peacefully preach for Islam. But because of the government antagonism and continuously sending armies to besiege the Mahdi, to arrest the Mahdi, war started. And this war, the Mahdi succeeded terrifically. And he wiped out, really, the British Empire and the forces of the Turkish and Egyptian forces, and succeeded in establishing the state. Mr. Churchill says in one of his writings that the Mahdi banners and drums swept the Sudan, and he established the rule of the saints. The revolution was very successful because it has purified Islam. What you see now of the Muslims in Sudan is the direct effect of Mahdism.
My plan to travel to Darfur is proving difficult to accomplish. I'm still waiting for the necessary permits. They don't actually say no, but they put me off from day to day. Luckily, I have my sketchbook and paints, and there are some wonderful subjects here to keep me busy. While this waiting game went on, I did a little exploring and asked John to accompany me north of Khartoum to the pyramids at Meroe, the last resting place of the great dynasty of the Nubian pharaohs. 2,000 years ago, this was the royal burial ground for the nearby capital of the Kingdom of Kush. Oh, and look at the carving over the door. In Meroe, it occurred to me to ask John if he would help me to get to Darfur. He seems to know the country well and is willing to give it a go. We are aiming for Dara, a small outpost in southwestern Darfur. It was here that grandfather was first appointed Mudir, a local administrator, before he was made governor of Darfur. Aged only 24, he became responsible for the civil and military government of an area as large as France. Darfur was even then a restless province. In his remote garrison, grandfather soon found himself embroiled in rebellions and intertribal wars. His Austrian army training stood him in good stead, however, and he proved to be courageous, resourceful, and frequently victorious against his more numerous enemies. He was wounded several times and fought some 27 battles, and thereby he earned the respect of his soldiers and of his enemies.
Ah, here we go.
Tiga belas
I
kecil.
wonder which the sweet ones are.
Itu mobil kerajaan back. Syukran.
So, you said you were from the south. What tribe were you?
Well, I'm from Dinka.
Dinka?
Yes.
Oh, yes, I've heard of the Dinka. So, how come you ended up in Khartoum?
Well, it's a long story. I came here when I was about 15, after I escaped at the age of 10.
Escaped?
Yes. Well, Sudan is a funniest country. In my previous life, I was kind of soldier.
If John was a soldier in South Sudan, was he with the army or the rebels? Of course, I wanted to know his story, but I didn't want to scare him off with too many questions. Well, it's not exactly the Ritz, but I guess it'll do. I'll take this one.
When the war started between South and North, there was a lot of lack of manpower. So the SPLA leader, John Gurr, have an idea of mobilizing kids from 4 years old to 12, bringing them together to Ethiopia to a camp. So I was mobilized with these other thousands of kids around southern Sudan. And we have to work from a village in southern Sudan to Ethiopia. And as working, we don't know we have no any ideas of being a soldier. So, of course, we have to work with less of food, less of water, and there's less of everything. And a lot of kids die because of hunger, thirst, being malnourished, and of course, exhausted. And the normal birds, like vulture, will come and pick the kids, and they're gone. And the wild animal, like hyena and other things, will just come also and grab them. So after we managed and we reached the camp in Ethiopia, it was horrible because there was nothing, there was no camp. We have to build our own houses. We have to make food for our own self. And you would imagine a 4-year-old kid call into the front of the group and ask to prepare the food for about 20 to 30 kids. Well, we didn't have 100 banknotes, for example, euro, to say you go and buy some food in the supermarket. It was not there. So all you get is a full basket of dry maize. And you have to pound that, cook it, and do all that thing. Usually, a normal kids cry, of course, if something terrible like that happens. When you cry, like I did, all they do is not comforting you, like it will be okay, you forget it, and somebody else does the job. No. They will select some other 5 strong kids than you, and they will start beating, and they will beat until you shut up. If you keep crying, they will beat. And if they're tired, some other will be brought. And so we went through it. Well, you might think of how come that you go through it. We were so little and as young as I could say. But mentally and everything, we're being handled and we're being treated like 35 years old adults. So we have to go through everything and do everything, being independent and as strong as you could. So our hearts, we try to change them to be stone hearts, have no feelings, emotionless. And all thought, when we, after some years, we were about 6, 7 years old, we get our military training. And at that moment, we were taught to kill, destroy, being emotionless, heartless, and having no other feeling, you see? So, yeah, that is it. You call it boy soldier, you call it child soldier. I was trained and I was a soldier. I was a man. And I want to go and fight, revenge my people, liberate cities, liberate the Sudan, make it a democratic and free country. That's what I was taught and taught.
Wow.
I remember this. We used to use it to summon us to dinner, but of course it's the Mahdi war drum that we kept in London until it came up here.
Right, yes. Of course, your grandfather's in a very difficult position there in Dara. Once the Hicks Pasha relief expedition had been defeated, he was really in a very awkward state.
And I remember he found it very hard to get communications out, and he used to write on cotton strips and stick them inside the skin of donkeys.
Yes. His position was really quite hopeless by then, though. Egypt had been occupied by the British. The Egyptian government was in no state to send any kind of expedition to Sudan, and the British government itself had decided that it did not wish to intervene in Sudan. So Slatin out there in Darfur was really lost by this stage.
In this hopeless situation, Grandfather showed himself to be pragmatic. In spite of his gallantry and leadership, his soldiers were convinced that a Christian could never prevail against the Mahdi's Islamic forces. He didn't take long to reflect, but did what his father had done. He converted, in his case, to Islam. He took the name Abd el-Qadir and even married the Sultan's daughter. Later, he wrote, "As a Christian, I stood alone amongst thousands and thousands of overexcited fanatics, drunk on victory, the lowest of whom thought himself better and worthier than me. Although I was not religious, I knew that in the future I must become a true devotee and show myself to be a Muslim in heart and soul."
So did these children die?
I was really shocked by John's harrowing story. When I spoke to him later, he told me the second half of his nightmare childhood. Aged 10, he managed to escape from the soldiers' camp and spent 5 years searching for his family until he finally arrived in Khartoum. There, he saved enough money with casual work to travel to Holland, where he was given asylum. He studied law and after many years had now come back to his homeland as a qualified lawyer to build a new life.
What's going on?
Well, this President Bashir signing the ceasefire deal with one of the Darfur rebel faction, Justice Equality Movement. It's live now in Doha.
Well, that's good. So it'll be the end of the war in Darfur.
It's just another piece of paper. I may sound pessimistic, but I bet in the near future, 2 days from now, you will hear another killing party in Darfur, because this is a deal between one faction and there's a lot of groups, rebel groups, fighting in Darfur. They're not included.
John is proved right. These are scenes which play out daily some 1,000 kilometers further west, in western Darfur, on the border between Chad and the Sudan. Since 2004, the UN and numerous NGOs operate refugee camps here for those fleeing the brutal conflict in Darfur. Madit arrived here in the camp with her family 8 years ago. She was then 1 year old. Madit and her brothers and sisters, some of whom were born here, know of nowhere else but this refugee camp. They have yet to see their homeland. The family fled, as did 100,000 of their compatriots, from the atrocities of the Janjaweed and those who, financed by Bashir's government, wage war for control of the land and water. Every day in the camp is exactly the same. Fetching water and wood, cooking tea and rice, and waiting in line endlessly for relief supplies. Madit and her family cannot leave the camp. Outside, they risk rape, kidnap, or forced military abduction. They are effectively prisoners, just like my grandfather was. But their captivity will probably last even longer.
معناها قلت له نمشي زمان ما بكفينا.
يا عمر النهي
انت قلت لي بدي قروش. صح؟
شايف الزول يعني جايبينه عشان نجي نقوم في شارع ونرجع.
ما صار له معلش ما جاء انه افكار بتاعه انا ما بمشي معه. خلاص لانه الزمن بتاعنا انتهى. انا بتحرك مع زول 7 يوم 7 يوم. اتفقنا لكن انه في الاخر الزمن اللي قلته انت ما فوقه وانتهى. الزمن انتهى.
انت قاعد في الزمن
الزمن انت قلت 7 يوم ال7 يوم انت
خلاص اركب
اي ما بنمشي ثاني ما صار من راجع اي
George, I'm afraid I have bad news for you. A lot of things have changed since I was here. Many checkpoints, too much problem security, and the driver is, he don't want to continue. So I think we have to go back.
That's it then, the end of the road for us. It seems we can't get through to Dara or Darfur, and we will have to go back to Khartoum. For grandfather too, the situation in Darfur finally became untenable. Cut off from all news, from any reinforcements, and with an ever-decreasing corps of loyal soldiers, he had no other way out to save the lives of his troops and himself than to surrender to the Mahdi's forces, who was camped outside Khartoum. He noted bitterly that his last night of freedom was Christmas Eve, 1883. General Gordon, the defender of Khartoum, was besieged on all sides. After holding out for 11 months, the starving garrison was on its last legs. In January 1885, the Mahdi launched his attack. The city fell, and with it, General Charles Gordon. So here are the Ansar bringing Gordon's head to my grandfather in chains and saying, "This is what happens to infidel dogs." And my grandfather said, "So what? A brave soldier has fallen at his post. His sufferings are over."
They're dramatic.
Yes, well, my grandfather always gave the best lines to himself. The irony was that within 3 months of capturing Khartoum and Gordon's death, the Mahdi himself was dead. And he died in this spot, so they built the tomb on the spot that he died on. There are many versions of the Mahdi's death. Some say he died of chicken pox, which was raging at the time. Father Orvalda, who was a fellow prisoner, said he died of excess. He'd become very overweight and he ate too much. And then my grandfather said he died of a fever.
Which is probably the typhoid.
Probably typhus, yes. But nobody knows. It's all legends and propaganda. And you know, the Mahdi wore a very special perfume that was a unique smell, and it was known as the holy aroma of El Mahdi.
Oh, yeah. That's what the guy just told me about, that some days a very special test roast, and you could smell it from the grapes.
Really?
Yes. And he said, yeah.
And the windows are beautiful.
Very beautiful.
You know that all this march from the Nuba Mountains to Khartoum, the Mahdi didn't used to ride a horse, a donkey, or a camel. He used to walk. He used to say that most of my people and my armies are walking, I must walk. He refused to ride a horse or anything of the sort. And he orders the caliphs, the emirs, the generals, the sheikhs to ride their animals, but he used to walk. So the Mahdi must have been extremely exhausted by the time he reached Khartoum. And just fever or some sort caused his death, really. So we believe that it was quite a natural death.
I'd always heard, you know, when he mentioned the Mahdi or anything, how much he liked the Mahdi. I mean, it wasn't because he was a prisoner and had to be there. Of course, he would have escaped earlier if he could have, because nobody stays a prisoner forever. But on the other hand, as a man, man to man, he liked the Mahdi very much. And therefore I understood that his life there wasn't too bad. It only became bad when the Mahdi died and the Khalifa took on, and the Khalifa didn't like my father. And therefore my father didn't like him, and things became less agreeable.
Yeah, he was his personal bodyguard, Mulazim. Grandfather spent the next 10 years in the service of the Khalifa Abdullahi, a time about which he later wrote, "The Khalifa is a mistrustful and capricious despot whose regime is founded on fear and brutality. Day after day, I had to rein in my pride and flatter him. Dressed in rags, sometimes ailing from a paucity of necessities, and at the mercy of constant humiliation from fanatics, thus I lived, year in, year out, a captive of the Mahdists."
They treated him very nicely. He was staying in a home, and he was giving servants, and he was summoned to the Khalifa in his house, and he was given that level of treatment. Yani. Other Europeans were in prison in chains.
Yeah.
He should have appreciated this.
So he was privileged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they took faith in him. They thought that this man is really good.
And you think he was privileged because of his conversion to Islam?
Not necessarily, not because of conversion, because of his approach, you know, to them. His approach was very peaceful, and then he converted to Islam. Although they were suspicious about his Islam, but they could not prove that he was not true. Because suspicion is not enough, you know. But his behavior was very nice and very obedient and very cooperative and very helpful, everything, you know. Very friendly with the people around him. So they kept him in that level of treatment all the time.
So the Mahdi's drum.
War drums.
War drum. My life hung by a silken thread, grandfather relates, as the Khalifa's mood swings were unpredictable. When he was in a good mood, he let me have money and building materials for my house. He invited me to eat with him, and he valued my counsel. But I had to be very careful, as the mood of the despot could change completely in an instant.
Well, he had a lot of wives.
He just said, preach, how could...
Salatin. He was like an agent, a double dealer, you know, staying with the Khalifa to convey the news from the Khalifa to them until he escaped. You see? So, and all the time he was not honest to the people who were treating him rather honestly, you know. If the Khalifa suspected Salatin at any time, he would have thrown him into prison with Nuffield and with Old Tower and all these people. But he took him with faith and confidence, you know.
Wow.